Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel and more Warzone Eternal. So today we're taking a look at the third video here for sort of pre-game activities. We've looked at deployment, we've looked at missions. Now we're going to take a look at the unique secondary objectives that the game has for us, and then go from there. So right off the bat, one of the things that we'll do, and this is another way for you to score victory points, everybody's going to secretly select 2 of these objectives that they're allowed to take, and then they're going to be revealed simultaneously. Now, a key caveat there is that 4 of them are for either Force, 2 for Agents of Light, or Servants of Darkness. So obviously, if you're on the good guy side, you can't really be on the bad guy side, and so on and so forth. Other things too, if both people have selected secondary objectives that require the placement of scenario objective counters, you take turns doing that with the player that didn't select the deployment area going first. And another little restriction here, no single secondary objective may provide more than 2 victory points to a force. So keep that in mind. So we're going to take a look at all of these in turn, and we'll start off with escort, which could be either force. So setup. The force that selected this secondary objective places 1 scenario objective counter on the center line of the battlefield, no closer than 6 to either end of the center line, and at least 12 from side A or B, and not on partially or completely any terrain feature. This counter should be represented by a human-sized model on a 30mm base, so you could use an extra one from either force or some other third faction or something suitable. So the rules for it: while in base-to-base contact with this objective counter and not engaged with an enemy unit, a unit from the force selected this may perform an interact action. You perform your required test, and on a success, it is moved 4 inches in any direction. So, and then scoring it, in the end turn phase of the 5th turn, this force gains 1 victory point if the scenario objective counter is in this force's deployment area. If the scenario objective counter has moved off the battlefield via side A or B, whichever side borders or is located behind this force's deployment area, this force instead gains 2 victory points. So it's pretty cool. It brings in another objective here where you're essentially trying to get look at it like a VIP or maybe even a hostage rescue or something along those lines, back to your side of the board and ideally off your deployment edge. So overall, a pretty cool little secondary, although it does require you to have the model to spare, essentially, to keep around and keep this moving, but then also enough other models in the force to hold off the enemy from killing your models that are in and around the model that you want to escort. So nice little one here that either side could take. Alrighty guys, next up is flanking maneuvers, another one for either force. Setup is normal on this one, or as normal. Then victory is in the end turn phase, so let's jump right over to that. So in the end turn phase of any turn after the first, the force that selected this objective gains a victory point if at least 1 friendly unit is completely within the enemy force's deployment area and completely within 6 of an edge of the battlefield, either side A or B. So similar to one of the missions right here, we just want to get across the board and get into their deployment zone by one way, shape, or form or another, and we do have to at least be within 6 of the table edge as well. So something to keep in mind. A little easier on some map setups than others, but it is a pretty straightforward one. Just get across and get into their deployment zone. So if you have anything that's super fast or maneuverable, and just an easy path towards getting to the other side, and you're taking this one, something to keep in mind. All right, next up, we'll take a look at hold ground. So on this one, very short and simple. So setup is as normal, and victory here. In the end turn phase of any turn after the first, the force that selected this objective gains a victory point if there are no enemy units within 4 of this force's deployment area. So something to keep in mind there. So in the other one, we got to be within 6 of their deployment zone, but here it's specifying 4, which gives us a little more cushion too. So even if they're getting close, they have to be really close. But basically the opposite of flanking in a certain sense here, right? We just want to keep them out of our deployment zones. So if you have something that you can keep towards the back, ideally with maybe long range, just pick off enemies that are getting too close, hopefully. So pretty straightforward stuff there. Alrighty guys, moving on. So the last of the ones available for either force, and that's intercept transmissions. This does have some setup requirements. So the force that selected this places 2 objective counters in their opponent's half of the battlefield, in other words, across the center line. No closer than 4 to the center line, though, or any other scenario objective counters, which can start filling up the battlefield with some of these things going on. But and that, as it says here, it does include the other scenario objective counters placed for this secondary objective, and not on partially or completely any terrain feature. So keep that in mind if when you have a board that's going to be fairly full and dense with terrain potentially. That's going to make this a little tougher to place in some cases. But this counter here, though, is a 40 millimeters in diameter and treated as a terrain feature with the impassable terrain trait. Gives you a little chance to be creative and do something with hobby features, so you could customize it to the type of board and map that you're playing on. So, but let's jump in and see what this actually does for us in the game. While in base-to-base contact with one of the scenario objective counters and not engaged with an enemy unit from this force that selected this may perform an interact action. So you perform your test. On a success, you've established a connection with the enemy's communication network. Once a unit resolves an interact action with one of the scenario objective counters for the first time in either in the other scenario objective counter is removed from the battlefield. So really we're placing 2, but really as soon as we resolve 1, we're essentially getting this done. But in the end turn phase of any turn after the first, again, in which this is successfully established, then the force that selected this gains a victory point as long as that unit is still in base-to-base contact with the scenario objective counter. So you got to score it. To do that, basically, you have to complete your roll, stay there for essentially until the end of the turn, and then get this resolved. So again, we do get to place 2 of these, which will hopefully force the enemy to spread out a little bit and try to guard as much real estate as possible, and then hopefully that'll open up a spot where we can go and claim this one essentially. So overall, pretty nice one to add. And again, this is another one that's available for either force. So last bit here, we're going to take a look at the 2 Agents of Light objectives and then the 2 Servants of Darkness. Alrighty guys, we are back. So first up for the Agents of Light, we have acceptable casualties. So on setup here, the force that selected this tallies the number of units in their force before the first start turn phase. That is the force's power. And then victory here, in the end turn phase of the 5th turn, total the number of units remaining in the force, excluding any units that may have been added to the force during the game. If the total is 75% or more of the force's power, it's actually worth 2. So in other words, if you've maintained most of your forces, you're going to get 2 out of this. If it's less than 75 but 50 or more, you gain 1. And obviously if you've gotten your butt whooped, it's not going to help you out at all. So this is one that's definitely contingent upon how well you do, not necessarily going to a certain spot in the map or getting to a certain spot. This is purely about preserving as much of your force as possible. And really the chance here to, even if you're not getting a really super well game here where you're just you're taking it to the enemy and you're not really losing it much in return, to get that second point, if you can at least get there with keeping 50 or more, that's going to be much more doable. At least maybe secure that 1 point. Then the other one for the agents here is sacrifice. So a little bit of a theme here: acceptable casualties and sacrifice. This one, no special setup conditions. Victory though, in the end turn phase of any turn after the first, if a unit with the trooper designation from the force that selected this secondary objective is engaged with an enemy unit with a higher DP value, then you gain a victory point. So basically, if you're taking on somebody that's more points than you, and you're engaged in hand-to-hand, then you'll secure that victory point there. So, and I think this one is one where I think we're only getting the 1 point out of it. Be interesting to get a clarification, like if we can do this multiple times to get the second point, but I think it's really just the 1. So we'll move on to the rest here. Alrighty, now we are on to the last bit here with the Servants of Darkness. So first we're going to send a message. No setup requirements here. Victory, though. When a unit with the leader designation from the force that selected this objective removes an enemy unit from the battlefield as a casualty as a result of a strike action in any turn after the first, gain a victory point. So pretty easy to do here. It's almost like a kill point in like 40k. You're just trying to kill something in, I think, I do believe like hand-to-hand for this, but in either case, we're ultimately just looking to kill something from the opposing side and gain the victory point. So fairly doable and fairly easy to select this one, and more likely than not score that at some point in the game. So it doesn't have to be any certain type of unit as far as what we're killing. We just have to have our leader do it. So, and then finally, slaughter. So we're sending a message and slaughtering here. No setup conditions as well. In the end turn phase of any turn after the first, in which this force is selected, in which units from this force that selected this have removed from the battlefield as casualties 2 or more enemy units with a total DP value that exceeds the DP value of any friendly units that were removed from the battlefield as casualties that turn, gain a victory point. So a little bit going on there, right? So first off, we have to remove from the battlefield as casualties 2 or more enemy units in a single turn. Their point value has to exceed the point value of any friendly units that were removed from the battlefield this as casualties this turn. So again, no matter what, we're having to kill 2 of theirs. Now if we kill 2 rather inexpensive units, that might be harder to do, but if we can remove 2 moderate to high point cost units, that should easily get us that part of it. But they have to exceed the value of any friendly units that were removed from the battlefield as casualties that turn. Now their clarification, I think, would be in order, and again, if anyone knows, does that mean we have to have lost a unit that turn? What if we kill 2 of theirs and we didn't lose anything that turn? Surely it does satisfy that the enemy points exceeded ours, because ours would be 0 in that turn. I would hope it would get ruled that way. We shouldn't have to lose anything just to satisfy this, essentially. So I think that's how it should work, but again, if you know anything different on that, correct us if I'm wrong. But that's a quick summary, guys, of all the secondaries. So it definitely adds a little bit more of a wrinkle to the games that we've, or the scenario parameters that we've looked at. Again, we got a great variety of map setups, we got a decent selection of missions, and now we throw in all these secondaries, which really should make for some interesting games and really prevent any 2 games from being the same, right? On top of that, also obviously the factions and units that are selected as well. So that takes care of a quick look through the major pre-game points. We're not going to get into list building or anything just yet for you guys, but especially for the newer players to like Warzone Eternal, if you're not coming from previous editions, hopefully that gives you a quick look at what pre-game tasks are there, and some of the variety and strategies that you're going to need to start thinking about, depending on, again, mission, map, and here what secondaries you want to maybe even build your force around to more easily achieve those, because sometimes the map setup and the mission might just not be in your favor, and also depending on what the opponent brings, right? So hope you enjoyed. Hit us up in the comments. Let us know what you prefer here from the secondaries, games you've had so far. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll have more Warzone Eternal very, very soon.